Today about the frozen water trade. Look, see, this is something that when it first came up, I thought, okay, what the hell is going on here, and how is it that ice was that valuable? And it sort of comes back to the beginning. We ask, well, how is wealth created? Hands up, who's actually looked into this a bit before coming today? Yeah? Okay, so basically to summarise, back in the day, if you if you're in a hot climate, couldn't get ice, couldn't get cooling, as well before electricity, people were able to cut ice in colder climates, shove it on a ship and send it to people in hot tropics without it melting on the way. But to back up a little bit, it comes to, we ask, how is wealth created? You've got this first point on innovation, entrepreneurship, which are really overused words these days. Politicians love them because they sound nice, but they're a bit ephemeral, but esoteric, which politicians also like, because it means they don't actually have to do anything. They can just float this word and it sounds great, and hopefully people vote for them. But these words sort of cover up those value creation processes whereby someone comes up with a new idea for a product or service, something doesn't exist already. They might see a way to do an existing one better or to do it cheaper. They open up new markets or supply an existing market in a different manner. And invariably involves trade between two sides where they swap two different goods. One of them often, not always, being money, often across borders. It can correct imbalances where one geographical region has a lot of products that another geographical region needs or wants and doesn't have. The old spice trade through the Dutch East Indies was a great example of that. People get all their spices in America and London, tea and things as well that they just couldn't grow in their countries, and which were in abundance over in the Far East there. Two ingredients almost always required are risk and capital. If there's no risk and it costs nothing to do, then it would be pretty much done already. It wouldn't be that difficult, and as a result it probably wouldn't be that valuable. Value comes from scarcity. Abundance means things are cheap. So you have to always take a chance. You always have to put your money or your time into an enterprise. And to round it off, a good idea is only ever a good idea is only a theory to begin with. And that's all very good and well and nice, but it doesn't put food on the table. It doesn't create wealth until someone actually comes along and buys that idea, or the consequences of the idea, the actual physical output that you've created from it. So you first actually need to communicate and sell this idea, these new innovative solutions, and have them broadly taken up. It's all very good and well that ASIC's Money Smart have that insurance bond up on their website, but I mean, who goes and reads the ASIC website just for fun? No one's going to go and learn about it there. So, this is a scene we've probably all enjoyed. Nice cocktails with ice beside a swimming pool, nice tropical location. It's only a very recent invention until, it's now 2017, until maybe about 60, 65 years ago, you couldn't actually do that. It was very, very hard, and 120 odd years ago it was impossible. No one had thought of enjoying a cocktail with ice beside a pool in the blazing hot sun. And why? Because ice, it was a resource like any other. You have countries that are rich in oil, like Saudi Arabia, gas like Qatar and Australia. If you had it, you had it. If you didn't, well, too bad, you had to get off someone else. And of course the challenge, if you're living there, down around here in the Caribbean, how are you going to get your ice? All the ice is up there and sort of across there. So there's this bloke called Frederick Tudor. He and his brother William, they're members of a dynastic New England family. They're very wealthy, very well known. Parents, grandparents had big names and sort of carried the family through. Living there in New England, they noticed that New England's ports tended to deal in goods that were created elsewhere. They came in through secondary trade or they shipped to the port and unloaded, but New England wasn't producing much itself. They didn't have coal, they didn't have iron, which are two big commodities at the time. Farmland was really pretty, but it was pretty poor quality generally. They weren't growing much out there. And they watched as spices arrived from the West Indies and they wondered, well, what can we send back there? What do we have in abundance that they don't? And William apparently made a joke to say, oh, well, we've got lots of ice and snow for a good chunk of the year, ha ha. And Frederick thought about it. The previous summer they'd travelled to Cuba and South Carolina. They had a terrible time in the stifling heat. This is back in the days when people were contracting yellow fever and all these sorts of terrible diseases that you don't really hear about so much anymore. But people would die in the summertime in these hot climates. It was still a pretty harsh life. They preferred the cooler climates of the northern US, so they said, okay, ice. Now, they're wealthy people. They actually had a little ice house on their property. It was sort of dug into the ground and insulated as best they could. What they do in winter is go and dig ice out of a pond, shove it in this ice house, store it there, and all through summer they could actually pull bits of ice out. They could have slushy ice cream and things like that. And they thought they had it pretty good. And they figured, well, why couldn't everyone have one of these things? Why can't we maybe scale it up? So rather than have our ice stored in a little ice house, maybe we could put on a massive ship and sail it all around the world to other people. And then everyone can enjoy this kind of thing that we've been enjoying, which we've sort of taken for granted. Now, Frederick was the younger brother. He's a bit more naive, a bit more idealistic. William had he'd fought in the American Civil War, gained a really good reputation for himself. He graduated from Harvard Law and even gone and studied in Europe, which was a big thing back in those days. It was in the late 1700s that he'd done that. William was sceptical. He said, come on, younger brother, I've seen a bit more of the world. I'm a bit more sensible. Fred, you're just a dreamer. But Frederick, he really became impassioned. He had this youthful zeal. He said, hey, well, what could go wrong? Let's give it a crack. Can't be too hard. So then they unfortunately got to the hard part. And they had to start looking at what are the logistics of this going to be. This is 1805, keep in mind, so you don't just get onto the internet, you don't look up, you don't call even the international operator on the telephone. To go and get contracts for these things, you actually have to go over there and start knocking on doors. So this is a big enterprise to try and get something like this off the ground and finding customers, finding suppliers. So they came up with many different means of packing ice, of storing it, but this is all very experimental at the time. These guys were groundbreakers in what they were doing. And they didn't know what they were doing. They were sort of learning it as they went along. Fending off competition is always a real difficulty, but luckily for them, for probably the first 20 years, they didn't really have much of a problem with competition. I think it's the quote from the Calvin and Hobbes comic strip that genius is never recognised in its own time, because everyone looked at these guys and said, you're out of your tree. One of their good friends was this bloke, Mr. Otis, who was the one who invented Otis elevators. Most lifts, if you go in, you look at the brand, it's either Otis or ThyssenKrupp. Well, Mr. Otis is a good friend. He didn't want to put him down, so he told them it seemed like a plausible enterprise. Said it was very plausible, but he politely declined to join them in it. So in 1805, Frederick boarded a ship and sailed out to the little island of Martinique to see if he could start getting a little bit of business built up. And Martinique, of course, is out in the Caribbean, so again, travelling back to where the region that had been previously. Tough weather. I think one of his brothers died on the previous trip, so it wasn't a simple undertaking here. So the first major foray there was to this island Martinique in the Caribbean. The family had contacts there. A few of them could speak French, the local language, so they're able to communicate. And they thought, this is our sort of first natural stop. It's a hot place. There are wealthy European people there. They speak French. We speak French. We know people there. Okay, can't be that hard. So the first thing that he said, okay, I'm going to shove ice on a ship and take it down to the Caribbean. Who's going to take my ice on board? He couldn't find a single shipper who'd do that, because they said, well, your ice is going to melt, it's going to damage the other goods on board, it's going to damage the ship, we don't want the wood sort of expanding and then contracting with it. No, forget that, you've got to be out of your tree. So, okay, he had the cost of $5,000, a hell of a lot of money in 1805. He had to go and buy his own boat. It was a great ice harvesting season that year. Very, very cold. The ice froze over early, froze thick, froze deep. The problem with that, though, was it meant that the ports were freezing up. So a lot of the ships were actually stranded in these iced over ports. There's a lot of bad weather at the time, delayed the first voyage by a few weeks. It was treacherous with bad weather on the way. They had pirates, episodes of armed conflict. At one point, as they sailed into harbour, they were actually fired upon. But then he eventually got that down there to Martinique. He thought, fantastic, I'm going to offload this ice. Everyone's going to have a great time. I'm going to keep a little bit and celebrate with a few nice cold drinks and sail back to New England absolutely flush with cash. So things changed a little bit when they touched down. Frederick had sent his brothers out there first to try and get exclusive rights to sell ice in this area. The negotiations hadn't been going that well, so they said, all right, what do we have to do to get this done? Let's bribe one of the local officials. So they gave the guy a bribe, and the next morning they suddenly had the contract. But when you indulge in a bit of corruption, sometimes it can come back on you. They had a bit of a reverse taste, because upon landing, one of the officials came along to him with a list of all these prominent local people and said, oh, by the way, we didn't tell you this before, but all these locals are going to expect free ice. The local minister, the mayor, all these other people, local prefect, you're going to give them some for free. Otherwise, well, what are you going to do? You've come all this way. So they sort of had to cop that one and wear it. Sometimes when you're in a particular area, you have to play by their rules or get out. So they stayed, played by the rules. Then Frederick found that his brothers hadn't arranged actual storage facilities for his ice on the land. They come up with a few ideas and said, oh, this is where you could maybe put a little ice house and store it there. What do you think? But they hadn't taken the initiative to actually go and build any little facilities. So he arrived there, had nowhere to unload his ice to. All he could do was try and sell it from the ship. But of course the locals had no ice boxes of their own at home. He, as the ice supplier, hadn't built any facilities. how do you expect the locals to have gone and developed their own? Most of them didn't even know this bloke was coming down with this new product that most of them hadn't seen or touched before. So they so what do? They turned up with bits of cloth to take little chunks of ice in, walk it home in a tropical country. Good luck if it actually made it back home on the way. But the thing is that this bloke had turned up with a product that people hadn't yet asked for, hadn't given them the means to get the most out of the product. They get home with a wet rag and a puddle, having parted with their hard-earned money. It didn't seem like a very good deal. So they sort of all scratched their heads and looked at this guy. He sort of scratched his head and thought, yeah, maybe there's a bit more to this than I thought at the outset. He's actually offered $4,000 for his entire shipment, but out of pride he turned it down, and he left Martinique well into the red from that adventure. Lost a lot of money on that very first trip. However, it's okay. Well, maybe he learned from that trip. Knocked a few lessons into his head. He'll come back next time better off. And of course, you could only do this once a year, really. The time it takes to harvest, sail a ship, sail the ship back. Winter's over. So it's a one shot only per season. So unfortunately, his first 10 years were not going well at all. He tried different locations, went down to Havana, kept trying with Martinique. It all wasn't going well. He lost a few ships. People died from disease, from drowning, from crime. There were piracy attacks on the way. Poor Frederick didn't do too well at all. There were a few bad ice seasons. There was war with Britain. They put an embargo on American trade, so you couldn't sail down anymore. His family, some of their other investments went poorly, so he didn't have the family's cash to back him anymore. Things are going really bad. Now, back in those days, if you were in debt and missed a payment, a sheriff went out, rounded you up and shoved you in jail until you could pay the debt. Which is really, you're hoping that you either had an enterprise that was making money and was going to deliver shortly, or you had family who could bail you out, because then you're not going to make any money from behind bars. So twice he was shoved in jail. He tried things like branching out into ship design and building ships. He found a shipyard and financial backers. His ship design was not good. He was trying to build for the Navy. The Navy decided that it was a pretty terrible ship. It did a couple of test runs and failed, so he incurred more debt. His attempts to branch out to find something else that would support his ice industry only set his ice business back. But he stuck with it. He believed in it. This guy was obsessed with his idea. So he kept doing little things like experimenting with different insulators, comparing peat and charcoal, because the physics of heating and cooling, they weren't well understood. They weren't understood back in those days. So self-learning and experimentation was all someone like Frederick could do. Get a couple of big barrels, line one with charcoal, line the other with peat, shove some ice in, come back a few days later and see which one is doing better. He chanced on a few little supportive markets. He realised that seaborne ships needed ballast. As I said before, everything was coming into New England, into Boston, but nothing much was going out, so ships would arrive, they'd unload, sail again. Now, a ship needs ballast to keep it at the right depth in the water and keep it steady. What they'd often have to do is, after they'd unloaded all their cargo and they had this light ship wobbling around on the water, they'd load the ships up with stones in Boston. It takes a lot to pay people to go and pick up heavy stones, not just pebbles, big stones. It's an expensive enterprise. Well, Frederick said, well, maybe I can give them ice as ballast. So they're shipping it wherever it needs to go. It also acts as ballast. They get paid for taking ballast. So he just kept at it bit by bit, refining his product and his offering, looking for sort of auxiliary products that he could put into the package there. So by 1815, 10 years after he'd first tried branching out into Martinique, I mean 10 years, this is still a start-up business after that time, he managed to load a shipment of ice for Havana and sail out in the middle of the night. The reason he did that, he said, in his words, he said the debtors' sheriffs were pursuing him right down to the wharf. He was basically a fugitive and trying to do business with an international supply chain 200 years ago. This is not an easy undertaking by any means. By the mid-1820s, things sort of started to turn. The trade was still precarious, but as things said, sort of become a bit more standardised. It was starting to move forward a little bit. Frederick lost more ships. He had a free-spending business partner in Martinique. The guy was uncommitted. He liked chasing certain markets because he just liked them. He fell in love with a local girl. He wasn't committed to the business at all and just sort of used it for his own lifestyle. Destroyed it entirely. Frederick lost Martinique, lost Havana, almost lost it. There was a fire that destroyed the business. One of his main people down there was murdered. So things are going really, really badly. And around him, he had relatives, friends, business associates. They're all perishing from disease. And things are looking really down for this bloke. So it's the best part now of 20 years after he'd first come up with this idea. And so decided to roll the dice, go big, almost go all in. He'd looked at New Orleans for a while. In America, it's steamy, it's hot, there's a lot of wealth there. We call it old wealth now, it was new wealth back then. He refined his pitch and he started marketing ice for drinks to wealthy people, saying, hey, have a drink with cold ice in it. And at the same time for people who maybe couldn't afford ice that much, because this is an expensive luxury product still, for the middle classes, he pitched it to them that you could use it to chill large amounts of water, you could use it to preserve food in an ice box. He had different pitches for different customers. He had many setbacks still. He had funders withdrawing, but he finally had some success. In 1821, it looked like everything was lost. He was going to probably go bankrupt again with no way of coming out and have to shut up shop. He got a letter from New Orleans saying that sales had succeeded and the revenue was actually 4 times his forecast amount. They're pulling in $40 a day, which was really good business back in the 1820s. Apparently he just collapsed. It was, 16 years of hard graft. And finally he gets this letter saying, you're not all the way there yet, but you've turned that corner. You've made it. It's starting to really work. So by the mid-20s, his success was noted by others and rivals emerged. New markets opened around the world, but particularly in the southern states of America. Cities like Charleston and Savannah provided strong markets. More acreage of New England ice was secured, and our man Frederick was the dominant player in the industry. It was time to innovate on his supply side, and he teamed up in 1825 with Nathaniel Wyeth, one of his suppliers, who invented a 2-bladed horse-drawn ice cutter. He cut an ice sheet into a checkerboard grid of blocks that could be easily pried out with iron bars. That replaced the labour-intensive process of harvesting ice with pickaxes, chisels and saws, and it enabled a mass production. Plus, the uniform blocks, basically giant ice cubes, could be packed more tightly to minimise melting. The new technology faced its biggest test when Tudor shipped ice from Boston to Calcutta in 1833. That was a journey of 16,000 miles. Despite spending 4 months at sea, most of the 180-tonne shipment arrived in India intact. Now, the crystal clear New England ice caused such a sensation in Calcutta that within 3 days residents had commissioned the construction of an ice house. By 1847, 52,000 tonnes of ice travelled by ship or train to 28 cities across America. Nearly half of it came from Boston, most of which was Tudor's. He maintained ice harvesting rights to key ponds throughout Massachusetts. The trade was a bedrock of 19th century New England commerce. By 1856, so barely a decade later, 150,000 tonnes of ice per year, 3 times as much, left on ships from Boston to 43 foreign countries, including China, Australia, Japan, Argentina. It was said that if you were running a London society dinner, it could not be a success unless it was supplied with Wenham Lake ice from New England. It was the product that you simply could not do without, as the crystal champagne of ice. Now, aided by the railroads, domestic ice consumption was even greater. Increasingly, though, the trade began to focus on supplying the growing cities on the East Coast, and citizens of New York and Philadelphia became huge consumers during the long hot summers. Ice was harvested from the Hudson River and from Maine. Ice began to be used in refrigerator cars by the railroad industry, and that allowed the meatpacking industry around Chicago and Cincinnati to slaughter cattle locally and then send meat east for either the internal or the overseas markets. Chilled refrigerator cars and ships created a national industry in fruit and veg, and those are products that again could previously only have been consumed locally. Fishermen began to preserve the catches in ice, which meant you could spend longer voyages and get bigger catches. And very importantly, the brewing industry became operational all year round. So at its peak at the end of the 19th century, the ice trade in America employed 90,000 people. It was worth, in today's money, about $700 million. Their ice houses could each store 250,000 tonnes of ice. Other countries came along, notably Norway, which exported 1 million tonnes of ice per year. Now, competition had been slowly growing not only from other ice harvesting countries, but from artificially produced plant ice and mechanically chilled facilities. At first, these were unreliable, but they began to get a bit of a toehold between 1850 and the 1870s. Pressure began to grow in time for a replacement for ice bunkers on transatlantic routes. Technology was used to directly chill rooms and containers, so it started to replace the need to carry ice at all. Steamships shipping beef from Argentina to France have got chilled storerooms, and various companies came out with new refrigerating and chilling technologies. After this time, we found that industries from fruit and vegetable warehouses to meat packers began to rely on chilling plants. Even though by 1880 artificial plant ice was still negligible, it really began to grow in volume in the last couple of decades of that century, and the price ended up becoming competitive with technological improvements. Australia, India, South America, such as Argentina and Brazil, were the first ones that really were able to make that change and build up the plant ice industry, because it was more expensive for natural ice to be shipped there. It was at a disadvantage in those locations. Regular ice famines helped increase this onset of artificial ice, such as the 1898 British ice famine. That caused price rises, and that, of course, fueled demand for plant ice and encouraged investment in the new technologies. In America, artificial plants became more numerous. Long-distance transport companies began to use it here and there. They still use cheap natural ice for the bulk of their refrigeration, but it was really handy at supply chain choke points and hubs to have some artificial plant ice on hand. Just allowed you extra optionality and certainty. And this meant, of course, then that the need to hold reserve stocks of natural ice started to fall away. Concerns also grew over the safety of natural ice. Now, this had been happening for a little while. Ice had been pulled from polluted or unclean lakes as far back as the 1870s. But in 1907 in New York, specialists claimed that ice from the Hudson River was unsafe for human consumption, even potentially contained typhoid germs. So public opinion started turning against natural ice. Major damage was also done to the industry by fire. Ice houses were, of course, they had to be very dry by their nature, and so, of course, this meant that there were sitting ducks in the case of any sparks from inefficient and heavy machinery. Famous blaze occurred at the American Ice Company facilities in Iceborough in 1910, destroyed all the buildings, destroyed adjacent ships, crippled the main ice industry. So by the outbreak of World War I in 1914, more plant ice was being produced in America each year than naturally harvested ice. Natural harvest saw a temporary increase in production during the war, but after the war, the trade collapsed totally. Industry turned to plant ice and mechanical cooling systems. The introduction of cheap electric motors meant that modern refrigerators became increasingly common in US homes in the 30s and across Europe by the 1950s, so that you can make your own ice at home. So I'd encourage you all to look into this great episode. It's a fascinating story. I've only had the time to cover it in a cursory manner. What I want to get across is that entrepreneurship is not easy. Entrepreneurs are the equivalent of economic explorers undertaking new grand expeditions into the unknown. There are huge risks, there are heavy funding requirements, it takes great commitment, and there are so many unknowns that are later encountered. But what later on seems like a great idea, even a common sense idea, at the outset can be ridiculed by bankers, bureaucrats, and broad society. Now, there's an element of creative destruction involved in starting these industries, but then when better or cheaper new technologies come along, you can actually find yourself the victim of a process that you initiated. So in the case of the ice industry, it spurred its own demise by encouraging people to have their own in-home ice refrigerators. As these became electrified and chillers were invented, people were able to create their own ice, their own cold, and had no further need to actually go and get blocks of ice externally. Now, as the value of a product shrinks, some providers may hang on for grim life, others see the writing on the wall, cut their losses, convert their assets to a better use. It's a tough gig at the start and at the beginning, hopefully punctuated by a period of windfall profits in the middle. But thanks to those few who do go and take that plunge, who obsessively follow their dreams come what may, the rest of us all end up much wealthier.